Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 141 of the Chronological Read Through the Bible. Today, for my commentary, I'm going to really be looking at 1 Kings chapter 3, and I'm picking up today in verse 16, but I do want to go back. So, I want to go back a little bit to yesterday, because yesterday I put a lot together there, and I wanted to focus a little bit more on the beginning in verse 1 of chapter 3, where it says that Solomon formed a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her to the city of David until he had finished building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. So we would guess that this is maybe the first wife of Solomon. We know he's going to end up with a multitude of wives and concubines, and it's just, that part of Solomon's life is very tragic, really. But I want to point out this aspect here. He has taken Pharaoh's daughter, and so he is marrying outside of his faith. And this is a grievous error. And this is one of the things that we're going to see Solomon does that is very much like the kings of the world rather than the kings of God's kingdom, is where they are marrying, or he is marrying, women from other nations of other faiths. So remember that Pharaoh saw himself as God. And so this is a real stark difference here in the life of Solomon. And I believe that in part, this is why we're about to find where Solomon is at when he goes to Gibeon. So, yesterday I talked about Solomon being at Gibeon when the Lord speaks to him, and the Lord says, "Whatever you want, ask of me, and it shall be yours." And we know that Solomon asked for wisdom. But here's an interesting thing. And this is something I myself really want to dive a little deeper into, because it's easy, as I even did yesterday, and partly I knew I would come back to it at this point, but as I did yesterday, it's easy almost to just look past this as you're reading, because you get so drawn into, wow, God said to Solomon, "Whatever you want, ask of me, and I'll give it to you." And it's hard for the human mind to not start thinking, well, wow, if God asked me that, what would I ask for? So let's look at this, though. When it says in verse 4, the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Solomon offered 1,000 burnt offerings on the altar. Now, this is the little thing that I feel needs to have a little more investigation. Is this at the altar of God that he's gone and taken sacrifices, and the priests are the ones performing the sacrifice, as would be the biblical order of things? Or has he gone to the high places in a sense like the pagans went to the high places? Now, I talked a little bit yesterday about the tabernacle of Moses, or the tabernacle of the wilderness, being in this location. But I still just find it a little odd that he's gone there for the sacrifice. Now, at what point in time we're going to see these events unfold as the temple of God is constructed? And that's what most of today's reading is on, is the temple being built up. So, how much influence, though, did Pharaoh's daughter have on Solomon? And I just want to put this out there. You've got to make sure that you're equally yoked. As the scripture says in the New Testament scriptures, that you are to be equally yoked. And we oftentimes only apply that to marriage. Well, before marriage, people normally date at this day and age, so it really should apply in the dating realm as well. And to those out there who might see this, that are in that process of dating, hey, don't do dating evangelism. it never works. Maybe that's a strong statement to say it never works, but I've seen it fail so many times or backfire many times on other individuals, and it's just heartbreaking. And the next part is, and I recently had this conversation with someone, and they didn't necessarily seem to like my opinion on this, but I think that the equally yoked part is not just meaning not to date an unbeliever, or marry an unbeliever, but I also believe that you need to be careful within denominations as well, because if you, let's say, had a spouse that, or even dating partner that ended up, they were Pentecostal and you were Baptist, let's say, though you might say, well, we're both evangelicals, there's going to be some conflict there. There's going to be difficulty in that relationship. And so, where one may say, hey, I don't know why you're not exercising these spiritual gifts, and the other one's like, I'm not into sensationalism, and it's going to just be an ongoing battle. And then what do you do with the children of that? You need to be equally yoked. And then I want to address this, just because I'm there, is that doesn't just mean marriage or dating. It's also the business world. When you are in business with somebody, you need to be equally yoked with that person. You will find, and especially, I can say this more to young people, because older people have, in many cases, already made those decisions. But to a young person, I'm just going to say, when you look at someone that you see, this person is miserable in their workplace, and all they ever do is they come home from work and they complain about work, you will oftentimes find that that's because that person is unequally yoked with their boss, the owner of the company, the company in general. And so you need to make sure that you're equally yoked there. Well, in today's lesson or reading, we come to the part that shows us this wisdom, this great wisdom, an example of what God had provided Solomon with. And it says in verse 16, "Then two women who were harlots came to the king and stood before him. One of the women said, 'O my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. It happened on the third day after I gave birth that this woman also gave birth to a child.'" So we get that the babies are just 3 days apart. They're going to lay out the story before Solomon that they were each sleeping with their child at night and nursing it, and then when the middle of the night came, one of the women found that she had suffocated her baby. So the one woman is telling Solomon, well, she swapped our babies. And the other woman is saying, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. Now, I want to tell you, I've had the privilege, and I say a privilege because it was wonderful to watch this expression come about. I've had the opportunity of sharing on 3 different occasions with young people, with teenagers, this story out of the scriptures, and they had never heard it before. And so when I got to Solomon's decision on this matter, I would see young people jump out of their seat and say, no, that's not right. And so let's see what wisdom God gave Solomon. And I say this because here in America, we grew up hearing this story maybe from the earliest of our childhood days. So we know the outcome. Probably everybody watching this video already knows what's going to happen. But imagine for a minute if you had never heard this story before and you didn't know what was about to happen. And this, to watch young people's reaction the first time they hear this story, it's amazing. So the woman is claiming that the other swapped the baby because she recognized that the dead baby that next morning was not hers. And the other woman's claiming, oh, no, I didn't swap babies. You rolled over on your baby and killed it. And so it says then, this is the outcome of the king. So verse 22. Then the other woman said, "No, for the living one is my son, and the dead one is your son." But the first woman said, "No, the dead one is your son, and the living one is my son." Thus they spoke before the king. Then the king said, "The one who says, 'This is my son who is living,' and your son is the dead one, and the other one says, 'No, for your son is the dead one, and my son is the living one.'" Now, it's like Solomon's been hearing this bickering back and forth, and now he's just saying, "Let me clarify." And this is always a good point. This is almost as wise as his final decision, and sometimes overlooked, that he is speaking back, saying, "This is how I understand things to be. Let me clarify with y'all. This is the event." And so it says, the king said in verse 24, "Get me a sword." So they brought a sword before the king. The king said, "Divide the living child in two, and give half to one and half to the other." And on 3 different occasions when I've shared this with young people who had never heard this story before, I would have young girls jumping out of their seats saying, "No, that's not right." And you would see people's reaction, and it was wonderful to see that. Of course, I think as Solomon's saying this, he knows from the beginning that this will be the outcome, and his decision will be easily made. And then the woman whose child was the living one spoke to the king, for she was deeply stirred over her son, and said, "O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means kill him." But the other said, "He shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide him." Then the king said, "Give the first woman the living child, and by no means kill him. She is his mother." Because the mother at all cost would want to protect her own child, even if it meant that she never got to see him again. Solomon acted in his wisdom. Now I wish we had many other accounts of stories, because I'm sure that Solomon's wisdom, which was God-given, would have many different accounts as this one that we just read. But as I said yesterday, of the great wisdom that God had given to Solomon, one of the greatest gifts that God can give anyone is a life of righteousness. And hopefully, if you are a wise person, your wisdom will lead you to righteous living, because that's where it really matters. We need to be walking with God and walking in His glory. You know, there are many highly intelligent people throughout history who rejected God. And sometimes people in the world will look at them and say, well, they are a smart person and they didn't believe in God. Well, this should help you realize that God's not just for the intellectuals. God is for everybody. And sometimes just because a person's a smart person or a wise person doesn't mean that they're going to always make the best decisions. Brothers and sisters, I just say this because in Solomon's wisdom, he's going to turn away. And you'll see by the time we get to chapter 11, he's not serving the Lord with his whole heart. And the Lord has to discipline him for that. Am I saying Solomon wasn't a great king? No, Solomon was a great king. And the boundaries and the fame of the nation of Israel spread throughout the known world at that time, and even beyond. And I just want to encourage you, though, to in your daily walk, to make sure that you're keeping in step with Him. Well, brothers and sisters, I hope that you're having a good day. Until tomorrow, God bless.